good afternoon. I hope lunch was good. I hope the morning sessions were everything you hoped they would be. And so this afternoon, this is going to be the final breakout session of the day. And we do not have, someone asked about evaluations. Those will be coming via email. And so please look for those and make sure you send them back because we really depend on your feedback. And we really appreciate all of that good information, both positive and negative, to help us continue to do the programming that really feels that it's beneficial to you. And this afternoon, I want to warmly welcome Dr. Ginny Fleming. And she is going to be talking about updates in metastatic breast cancer. And for me, that personally holds a very close, comforting that she is here because I do a metastatic breast cancer group here at Wellness House, and it's every Tuesday from 10 to 11:30. And so I want to invite anybody here that doesn't know about that to please know that we do offer that service. So Dr. Fleming has a long-standing interest in the development of new treatments for both breast and gynecological malignancies. She's currently director of medical oncology for breast and gynae programs at the University of Chicago, and also serves as PI for protocol operations at the Alliance for Clinical Oncology, an NCI clinical trials group. And so I'd like to have all of us welcome Dr. Ginny Fleming.
Thanks so much for inviting me. Thanks for staying on such a lovely afternoon. I have to say, I look at the weather, and we haven't seen the sun for ages, and I think, you know something? Everybody's going to just decide it. But I'm going to divide my talk into a couple of parts. The first part, in just the introductory slide, I'm just going to talk about some theories of cancer, because these are things you read about on the internet all the time, and it's just sort of frameworks of thinking about things more than anything in specific. Then I'll talk about the most recent two categories of drugs that have FDA approval for metastatic breast cancer. Then I'll talk a little bit about a couple of new specific research compounds that are out there things that you may have heard about that are sort of getting to the point where they're hitting the news. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sort of changes in the way that clinical trials are set up, because often people are curious about that and how they're arranged, and work has changed a lot over the past few years. So feel free to stop me at any time. I don't think that, if I talk too long, they'll just cut me off because everything have So first, this is just worldviews, and not really specific to metastatic breast cancer. I think these hold to metastatic cancer and indeed to cancer altogether. None of these I would regard as truth. It's sort of like the blind man and the elephant. They're all probably partly true, and they interact in ways we don't understand. But the question is, what is cancer, and why does it survive where it does, and why don't all our treatments work? So those are the questions that researchers are grappling with. And one theory is, okay, it's the tumor microenvironment. We've been looking at cancer cells and growing cancer cells in our petri dishes and taking cancer cells and growing them in mice. And what matters more is the cells that are around the cancer cell. And this ranges from the blood vessels, which is sort of maybe the original tumor microenvironment idea. And some of you may remember anti-angiogenic therapy, maybe anti-blood vessel therapy, where the goal is not to treat the tumor, but to cut the blood vessels off that feed the tumor. That's one of these categories of this thought. Immunotherapy really belongs to this category as well, because it's not so much the cancer, but whether or not the cells around it are of the right sort that allow the immune system to attack it, and whether the right immune cells surround it. For example, just in ovarian cancer, it was known, 90 years ago, that ovarian cancers that had a lot of lymphocytes around them, that those patients tended to live longer, but they didn't know what to do with that information, and we still don't quite. And then there's the structural cells, the fibroblasts, the things that kind of are the scaffolding that hold everybody in place. And many researchers are spending their time on that and wondering, Why does a certain cancer go to the liver rather than to the brain? Maybe we need to attack something about how it structures itself. So again, this is one whole category of thought about why cancers escape our current treatment and where we should go. Another thought is the cancer stem cell hypothesis. This is that cancers are kind of like beehives. There's only one queen bee or maybe a few queen bees, and those are the only ones that can actually reproduce. And that they also tend to be more resistant to chemotherapy. So you can kill off the entire beehive and make the cancer look like it's gone, but if that queen bee cell has survived, then it will regrow. So there are whole companies, of which Stemcentrx is one, that are built on the idea that can we identify these stem cells? And many people think they can, but there's a lot of argument and controversy. And if we identify them, can we target them and destroy them? And if we do that, would that be the solution to treating metastatic cancers? There's a whole area of what is called tumor heterogeneity, meaning that even within one person, the cancer isn't all the same. We already know, they talk about personalized medicine, that a breast cancer isn't the same thing. Like a HER2-positive breast cancer is not the same as an ER-positive, HER2-negative breast cancer and can't be necessarily always treated the same way. But even within one person, with multiple sites of metastases, they're not always all the same. If you biopsy them and do gene sequencing on the tumors, there can be differences, sometimes not important and sometimes important. These can also change over time, so that's why some people are advocates of repeating biopsies frequently and saying, okay, well, let's look now. However, there's also a lot of argument because some people say one of the features of cancers is that they mutate frequently. They mutate a lot. But not every mutation is important. So, of course, it's going to change, but it's just fragmenting because its machinery is breaking down. And that doesn't mean because it has that broken spot that is going to be a target for therapy. So, again, this is an area where there's very real argument between people who say it's critical to rebiopsy your most recent tumor and figure out what it looks like versus those who say, no, probably the important things in your cancer were there all along. The driver changes. I don't know. Repeat biopsies are obviously not always safe and are often not comfortable. So another term that you see floating around is liquid biopsies, by which people mean that the tumors have DNA that breaks off and floats in the blood. Can we figure out the important changes from the DNA floating in the blood? Also controversial because, well, we just don't know if all the DNA we want to see is in the blood or all the important DNA. And then I think perhaps the most recent on the scene is the idea about the microbiome, that it's your microbiome that's important, by which is meant all the bacteria that live on you, your gut and your mouth, right? You've got billions of bacteria that make their home, and how important are these in both allowing cancer to be caused and in the immune system and in anything else. And I think that it isn't known. It's certainly very important in various autoimmune diseases. And certainly we know that antibiotics that destroy your gut flora cause diarrhea, but how important really is it in cancer causing a treatment? So if you ever go on a trial and they say, well, we want stool culture, we want to swab your mouth, and we're taking this, that's what they're looking at. They're trying to do this, sequence it all, put it in some giant computer, and try to analyze whether certain microbiome changes are associated with certain cancers and responses to therapy. I think this is in its infancy, and I don't know where it will go. I think it's attractive because theoretically you want to be able to change your microbiome. I think people think of it as simpler. Well, if you just eat something different, you change it. I don't think it's quite that easy. I think your microbiome tends to be somewhat stabilized by the time you're an adult, but there might be ways to change it. So again, these are just terms that I'm going to introduce, and you'll hear me refer back to some of them as I talk about some of the newer therapies. I don't know that any one of them is going to be the answer to breast cancer, but there are different ways that different new drugs and different companies are trying to attack metastatic breast cancer as well as other cancers. So again, I'm going to talk about a little bit now newer, already FDA-approved therapies that are not yet FDA-approved, and then something about the new world of clinical trials. So the two newest FDA-approved drugs or category of drugs for metastatic breast cancer. The first is for ER-positive tumors. And again, those are tumors that express estrogen receptor, so we're still sensitive to changes in estrogen level. And this category of drugs is CDK4/6 inhibitors. There are 3 of them: palbociclib, ribociclib, abemaciclib, and you can see there on the right is that those are the generic names, are the brand names. Now, I think what you have to recognize is that all of these, to my mind, are very similar, and you see new hype for each one as each one gets approved and gets approved in a slightly different way. But it isn't likely that one of them is going to work when the other one hasn't. They're all similar. They're all pills. They're all combined with other endocrine therapy, and tend to be used for first line, if possible, or second line for tumors that are also estrogen sensitive. So with an aromatase inhibitor, like letrozole, that's where it works. So instead of the old days where the first treatment would be just a hormone blocking pill, now it tends to be a hormone blocking pill or injection plus one of these 3 CDK4/6 inhibitors. They all cause some decrease in blood counts, but other than that are fairly well tolerated. They all dramatically increase the time till cancer grows, as in the trial term progression-free survival, so the length of time until there's some progression seen on scan. So far, none of them have been shown to increase overall survival. But because the delay in time till cancer growth is so dramatic and the side effects are so low, they've become more widely adopted as standard. So here again, this is just showing a table of all the names of the trials. All the trials have names: the Paloma, the Mona Lisa. Each company gives its trials these names. And you can see this is the second column shows what it's FDA approved to be with. These are all other hormone blocking treatments. And here you see how much it improves the time till the cancer grows in this PFS column. So for example, the first one trial showed with palbociclib that the time till the cancer grew and the average woman was increased from 10 months to 20 months by the addition of this pill for metastatic disease, which is fairly substantial and for most people a meaningful delay in the time till cancer grows. And then subsequently they've shown that it worked with other endocrine agents and that it worked for premenopausal women if the ovaries were shut down, and all these other trials are sort of expanding on the usefulness of it. And this is just at the most recent 2018 ASCO meeting where they showed, okay, if you shut the ovaries down in a premenopausal woman, it also works. And this is, again, just another way of looking progression-free survival. When the lower curve goes, that means that the cancer has grown, so we want the curve to be up high, and the curve with the drug shows a longer time to promote progression. That is pretty meaningful. But the overall survival, you see that the curve with the drug is on top, but not by nearly the amount that we would have preferred to see. So the second group of compound, or the second compound that's been recently approved, is for a much narrower subset than all estrogen receptor positive cancers. It's for patients who have cancer with a germline BRCA mutation. So I think most of you probably know that that cancers can be inherited, and the most common genes that we know of that cause an inherited cancer are the BRCA genes, or so-called breast cancer genes 1 and 2, and they carry a risk for both breast cancer and ovarian cancer. A person who inherits one of these genes over her lifetime has an 80% chance plus of developing breast cancer. It's never 100, and a 20 to 40% chance of developing ovarian cancer. Each first-degree relative, including each child, has a 50-50 chance of inheriting the gene. And it's encouraged that people have their relatives tested, because ovarian cancer can often be prevented by having the tubes and ovaries removed, and MRI screening is always approved by insurance, and people who have known BRCA mutations, people can choose if they wish to have mastectomy. So there are things that can be done if you know ahead of time that you have a germline mutation. But this is the first time a drug has been approved for the treatment of the cancer that has been different in a person who has a germline mutation. And by germline, I just mean it's inherited. So that would be seen in any cell in the body of the person who has it. And if you swab your mouth and send it off to 23andMe, if you do a regular blood test, it's in every cell. And they can tell that it's there. As is what distinguished from a mutation that might be only in the tumor. So, for example, in ovarian cancer, although not in breast cancer so often, there can also be BRCA mutations or other mutations that are only in the tumor and happened in the tumor, but aren't inherited and can't be passed on. PARP inhibitors also seem to help in that situation. It's just not common in breast cancer. So what is PARP? It's an enzyme that helps in DNA repair. Remember, DNA is the blueprint for all the cells of your body. And every cell in your body has the same, more or less, minor details, DNA. And the cells divide, and the pattern blueprint has to be carried on. If the DNA breaks, and like a single DNA is double-stranded helix, single-strand breaks happen all the time in your body. If you got it from some sunlight, whatever, you had a mistake that occurred, and the body fixes it. It's not like DNA damage doesn't occur. It happens all the time. One of the things that helps do that fixing, one of the major things, is called PARP, this PARP enzyme. As a way it fixes, it turns that single strand break into a double strand break, and that's how it then is part of its way of fixing. If you're a normal cell, then that goes into the machinery that repairs double strand breaks and everything goes fine. However, HRD or BRCA deficient cells don't have that normal pathway of repair, so it causes these cells to die. So hence, inhibition of the PARP enzyme, which doesn't make a big difference to cells that aren't BRCA deficient, can be deadly to cells that are. Hence the importance of the BRCA mutation in having them work. There's not just one PARP inhibitor. There are many of them. These are probably the best tested of them, of which niraparib, rucaparib, and olaparib, these three are approved for ovarian cancer. And olaparib is the one just approved for breast cancer, and it goes by the trade name of Lynparza. Others are likely to be approved soon. They are different in their potency, and that's widely advertised, but I don't know how important that is because you usually just take a higher dose of the less potent ones, so I'm not sure that that's critical. And there's, to my mind, not much good evidence that if one of them doesn't work, another might, but that hasn't been widely tested yet.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
So if you have the BRCA mutation, are you taking the PARP inhibitors prior to being diagnosed with breast cancer, or is this after treatment?
This is approved for metastatic disease only.
And for people with metastatic disease, the PARP inhibitors would largely be most effective for people with the triple negative.
That's all it's approved for at this time, I think. Well, I don't know. Most people, I think it's approved for actually any germline BRCA mutations. It's just the predominant number of them are triple negative, right? BRCA1 mutations tend to occur with triple negative breast cancer, as you say.
So then, like, I have ER positive and I'm metastatic, but I also have the BRCA1. So
I think that it is approved in that, but I need to double check that. The study was done only in triple negative. If not, though, it might be possible, nonetheless, to get insurance to cover it. It might still well be active.
Well, like my understanding was because my tumors were ER positive, it didn't come off the BRCA1 mutation.
It probably came off of
that it wasn't related to the BRCA1. It just was a.
I don't know that I would assume that. Most BRCA1 tumors are in fact triple negative, but I'm not sure that I would assume. I'm not sure I would assume that.
Okay.
If you have a family where everybody in the family has a BRCA mutation and all the tumors are triple negative and you have it and your tumor's ER positive, then maybe, but you'd have to talk to the genetic counselor about the statistical likelihood, of that being the case.
Okay.
This just shows, this is what they call a waterfall plot. So it's just a tumor measurement thing, and it's often done in early trials. It's just done to show what is the best change. So if a tumor shrank by a certain amount and it goes down, that means it's shrinking. So what you want to see is a way down arrow, and if it goes down to 100, that's complete disappearance of the cancer. So it's just an idea, like a quick glance at a group of patients who got this drug. All these people had the tumor grow, and all these people had the tumor shrink, and this is the best shrinkage that they got at any time. The bottom line is ovarian cancer, and what it is just designed to show is it is not only patients with a BRCA mutation that benefit. You get shrinkage even in patients that do not have a BRCA mutation, but in breast cancer, the benefits seem to be limited to those patients who do. This is the name of the study, the Olympiad study that got FDA approval for the disease. They required that patients had patients had to have had a taxane and an anthracycline. For most people, that would be adriamycin and Taxol. That's how the study was done. And ER-positive disease, so they were in there, had to have had already tamoxifen or an aromatase inhibitor. So these are people whose breast cancer had prior therapy. It wasn't the first treatment that they got. However, and it was randomized to either the olaparib or to the treatment of the physician and patient's choice, but these were the only 3 treatments allowed. The one thing you'll notice that isn't allowed on there is platinum, cisplatin, or carboplatin, for the reason that I'll show you in a moment, that at least in ovarian cancer, tumors where platinum doesn't work, PARP inhibitors don't work either, so it isn't a good choice for them. This is just showing you, this is data from ovarian cancer. This again is showing in this group of patients, these are the groups that the PARP inhibitor worked best on. If the dot is over here, and it didn't work very well if the dot is over there. So in patients that were platinum refractory, meaning that platinum didn't work on the disease, you can see the dot is way over there. And in patients where platinum worked, you can see the dot is over to this side. So again, just from the ovarian cancer experience, they knew that tumors that had grown on platinum, cisplatin, carboplatin, or where that didn't work, PARP inhibitors didn't help. So they didn't test that in breast cancer. They found that compared to standard therapy, there were 60% of tumors that shrank significantly and on the PARP inhibitor, only 29% on standard therapy. And the number that disappeared completely was 9%. This response lasted on average for about 6 months, but in some people longer. And this again just shows you another curve that I said showing time till tumor growth, that the olaparib red line is on top of the choice of physician-patient choice of the other 3 treatments, showing that it seemed to be a better choice in these patients who had a BRCA mutation. However, as unfortunately as the situation with the other drug category I discussed, the CD4/6 inhibitors for ER-positive disease, it didn't seem to translate into people living longer. Now, that may be because they were able to cross over and get a PARP inhibitor in a different study or go on to platinum therapy, since there are other options. In general, even if they were to work the same way, a PARP inhibitor, which is a pill, is generally easier than platinum therapy, which is by vein and causes a fair amount of nausea, vomiting, and low blood count. So for most people, it's a better quality of life. So again, olaparib was approved for use in BRCA mutation carriers after failure of other chemotherapy. All the PARP inhibitors are pills. None of them are IV at this time, not that they couldn't exist. They're likely not better than cisplatin or carboplatin, but they are less toxic. What are the side effects? They can all cause low blood counts and requires blood count monitoring in the beginning or after adjustment of the dose. They can cause nausea and diarrhea. Those too may require dose adjustment, but most people, they're not severe. And like almost any other anti-cancer therapy, they do sometimes cause tiredness. I have a question.
Yeah. So is Ibrance a PARP inhibitor?
Ibrance is not a PARP inhibitor.
Not.
I believe that Ibrance is everolimus, right?
No,
Oh no, it's palbociclib.
palbociclib.
Ibrance is palbociclib. So it's not the CDK4/6 inhibitor.
helpful.
Let me go back, I think that was, we looked up the generic on the brand names, unfortunately.
Yes, Ibrance is palbociclib.
So I did have a question. So if you mentioned that there right now it's kind of like a sort of a Coke Pepsi situation. We don't know that there's a great deal of difference between palbociclib, ribociclib, or abemaciclib. So if you were given palbociclib and that stopped working for you, you would not go on to
I would not.
the other two. You would.
I would not recommend that.
Would you perhaps try another like? I guess it depends what they paired like the palbociclib with, but what would you go on to potentially?
Right, it depends on what they paired the palbociclib with. So if you got that with an aromatase inhibitor, you might go on to something like fulvestrant. There's always everolimus, the another category that goes to mTOR inhibitors. Those can be tried. It depends on how long it worked with. There are also other anti-estrogen drugs out there that are, some of them work better than others, and some of them are older than others. If at some point when all anti-estrogen therapy has failed, then you move on to chemotherapy.
I have a question. This is the new standard of care, then the combination?
I think the new standard of care is to, when the initial diagnosis for estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, most people are offered the combination. I wouldn't say 100%. Some patients' bone marrow doesn't tolerate it, and some people really don't want to, have very minimal disease, and they think their quality of life would be better. It's a little bit simpler just to take an aromatase inhibitor, but for most.
So let's say you've been on a AI for say 5 or 6 years and you're stable, and your doctor's not going to change that. They're not going to add this all of a sudden.
No, I don't think so, unless you were stable with pain,
No, but if you're really stable and pretty healthy, would you just stay with what's working?
Mm-hmm. This can always be added on at the time when you need to switch with whatever the second endocrine therapy choice is. I don't think there would be a reason to switch off something if you're really stable. You can never get fewer side effects by adding another drug.
Why are these inhibitors not used for first-time diagnosis? Why is it just for metastatic?
They're being tested for first-time diagnosis. Not everything that works in metastatic disease turns out to help. Up front you think that it would, and usually that is the sequence. First we show that it's effective in metastatic disease, and then we test it for original diagnosis. There's an ongoing trial. There's several, but the biggest one in the United States, I believe, is called PALIS, palbociclib, and that is randomizing women with early stage disease, but not too early. I think right now you have to have positive lymph nodes because they think people don't want to do it on women who are too low risk to get regular standard endocrine therapy or standard endocrine therapy plus palbociclib for 2 years. That trial is approved well, but isn't quite finished yet, but it'll probably be 4 or 5 years before they have results, would be my guess, just because estrogen receptor positive breast cancer on average comes back late-ish, So it takes a while to get results with the study. So it's being tested, I guess, is you're on track. Moving on, I think, to unapproved agents. So what's under development? Well, the two things that I thought I'd discuss briefly, one is immunotherapy, because although no immunotherapy is approved for metastatic breast cancer yet, certainly immunotherapy drugs are approved for lots of different cancer types. Started out in melanoma. So the immunotherapy covers a wide variety of treatments, ranging from tumor vaccines to you put up CAR T cells and pills and things like that. What I'm going to be discussing at this point is only these agents that we call immune checkpoint inhibitors, and they block what we call PD-1 or PD-L1, programmed death 1 or programmed death ligand 1. These are immune stimulating agents. And they're all by vein. They're all what we call monoclonal antibodies, meaning they all end in MAD if you look at the generic drug name. And they stimulate your immune system, so the major side effects include the body attacking itself. They're often not used in people that already have diseases that we call autoimmune diseases or body attacking yourself diseases, which include things like rheumatoid arthritis, which is your body attacking your own joints, Crohn's disease, which is your body attacking your own intestine, or autoimmune hepatitis. They can mimic all these things. So, for example, you can get severe diarrhea that looks for all the world like you have ulcerative colitis. You can get severe lung disease if they attack your lungs. You can get hepatitis if they attack your liver. You can get, I'd say hypothyroidism is probably one of the least worried or most treatable but most common side effects if it attacks the thyroid. Now, I would say that most people don't get them, and if you don't get these side effects, then they are relatively free of side effects in the sense your hair doesn't fall out, they don't cause nausea and vomiting, they don't generally lower your blood counts. If you get these side effects, they can be very severe, and they require us to then suppress the immune system with high doses of immune suppressive agents, such as usually initially steroids like prednisone, and hopefully we can get it under control that way. People always think that everything stimulating the immune system is good, but the immune system is very complicated and very highly regulated to prevent it attacking you, and obviously our drugs are not quite as selective as we want them to be yet. So this just shows how you work. Your dendritic cells, so-called, chomp up little pieces of tumor, and they use those little bits of tumor to train your T cells in order to attack the tumor cell. That is the process, and there's all sorts of new drugs being developed. And this slide shows just a few number of them that are trying to interfere with this process in some way. What we're talking about here is the PD-1, PD-L1 junction. So here's your tumor cell. Your tumor cell expresses PD-L1, then that is a brake on your T cell. And it tells it, don't eat me, stop. And what these drugs do is knock out that particular brake. It's not the only brake, there's other brakes that don't always work. That's when you say PD-1 or immune checkpoint, that is what you are usually talking about. Whoops. Okay. So what trials have been reported this is only in metastatic breast cancer so far. Again, pembrolizumab has the most trials. You've seen billboards for that, I'm sure. The brand name of it is Keytruda. I'm not sure. I'm always wondering how people will figure out what it's for, because it just shows a happy family, you know. know whatever that's supposed to be for. But in fact, it's an immune stimulating agent, and a lot of the trials that use pembrolizumab are called Keynote. That's just how they named their trials. So Keynote 1 to 86 or whatever. And you can see here, ORR, that's the response rate, meaning in trial language, what percentage of cancers shrank by a third or more. That's pretty much how they call it. And you can see that just by themselves, in TNBC, which is I'm using for short for triple negative breast cancer, that percentage has ranged from about only 5% to 23%, not high enough for the FDA to think that this was exciting yet. It seems also that it works better in triple-negative breast cancers that have less previous therapy. Their one trial in ER-positive disease was 12%. Others with that drug. Atezolizumab, again, another immune checkpoint inhibitor. Notice they all end in MAD. Those are the generic names. And these is another approved drug, but just not for breast cancer. 10% in triple-negative. People had shrinkage of avelumab, another one, 8.6 and 2.8%. So again, it just hasn't been as good as we would like. For those people who do get a shrinkage, the lure of immune therapy is that it sometimes lasts a long time. You get all these sort of miracle cases where somebody who just has complete disappearance and it lasts for years, as opposed to something like olaparib, where most of the time you're talking months or less than a year for the average person. When immunotherapy does work, it can be a very long time, and you don't always need to continue the immune agent. In fact, one thing that is unknown is how long you need to treat for. A lot of studies are simply stopping after 2 years, saying that's long enough, and then the body will be trained to do it on its own. But we don't know yet. So many of the studies that are now ongoing are using combination. So they're saying, okay, one immune agent alone isn't enough. We need to combine it with something else. So you'll see many clinical trials that combine it with a different immune therapy. So we have one at University of Chicago called IMOSART. I don't even know why they call it that, but it's combining radiation with nivolumab, which is an approved, but not for breast cancer, immunotherapy, plus rotating different newer ones that knock out other breaks. Basically, as you saw, there's not just one break, there's lots of them. So people are trying to knock out breaks on both sides of that immune system. Adding more immunostimulating agents tends to increase side effects, mainly increase the number of autoimmune reactions, so it seems to come at a cost. And we don't yet know whether this will work better in metastatic breast cancer. Again, an area that you have seen that there's been a lot of excitement is being compared with combining with radiation. So we have at least 2 trials where they radiate one tumor, not with the goal of making that tumor go away, but they believe that that radiation destroying the tumor opens up new parts of the tumor for the immune system to see as those radiated cells die, thereby making the immunotherapy work better. So there's a number of trials exploring that. They're also being combined with chemotherapy, somewhat in a similar way, that the chemotherapy might also, as the cells die, open up new parts to the immune system. And if you're stimulating the immune system at the same time, you train it to recognize these new parts. For HER2-positive disease, the most promising studies have been combining it with anti-HER2 therapy rather than by itself. All these things, however, are still early in development, and I don't think we know yet which way is going to work out. I think everybody believes that some fraction of almost every disease is going to respond, and we don't yet know which one. For example, in cervical cancer, pembrolizumab just got approved a few months ago for only PD-1 expressing tumors. One thing you have to recognize is that these assays, although they're approved, are very variable. So a tumor can be positive by one assay and negative by another, and widely. And the field is moving incredibly fast. So that both the assays aren't all the same and standardized, the treatments aren't all the same and standardized. The trials accrue very fast. I sometimes feel like in trying to get these studies, I have worked hard to get studies open that close the same day because they accrue so fast with excitement. So, not because they're working, but because immunotherapy has shown such promise in other tumors. So it's a new world. What's another area that research? This is simply a trial ongoing at the University of Chicago in triple-negative breast cancer. A researcher at the University of Chicago, Dr. Condon, has done a lot of work with GR, which is glucocorticoid receptor. You've all heard of ER, estrogen receptor, PR, progesterone receptor. There's also a glucocorticoid receptor. Corticosteroids are, besides immune suppressants, also stress hormones. In her lab, if these GRs are expressed on the tumor and stimulated by either stress or cortisol, then the chemotherapy doesn't work quite as well. So several small companies have developed blockers of GR, and they're combining it with immunotherapy in this case, and chemotherapy in some other cases, trying to make the immunotherapy of the chemotherapy work better. Again, ER and PR, there are many nuclear receptors, as we call them. Those are only 2 of them. This just shows that in mice, it worked a lot better. Unfortunately, everything that works in mice doesn't always work when we get it into people. And this is the trial combining it with chemotherapy. The one I showed was combining it with immunotherapy. Again, these are randomized trials where everybody gets the chemo and then half the patients get the GR blocker. Another set of new agents are what are called immunoconjugates. These are when people talk about guided missiles with payload. They're talking about immunoconjugates. And the one that's had the most press is this in breast cancer recently, to qualify that, is this Immu-132 drug. So this is what a monoclonal antibody looks like. I've been talking about it. All monoclonal antibodies have this Y structure, where this is a complicated program that targets it to a specific thing, making it a guided missile. So you can, in this case, this is targeted to TROP2, which just happens to be something that is a lot expressed on breast cancer. The breast cancer cells have it. So therefore, this goes to it, and then they attach a chemotherapy to that. So it guides the chemotherapy right to the cell. There have been promising results. This, again, remember I told you about waterfall plots, shows that in
patients with triple negative breast cancer, just getting this by itself, this is the rate of tumor shrinkage. And you can see that most patients appeared to have shrinkage, and these are people that had significant amount of prior treatment. In ASCO this year, they showed that it also seems to work in ER-positive disease, but the ongoing large randomized trial right now is for triple negative breast cancer, and it's similar in design to the trial for PARP inhibitors that you saw in triple negative breast cancer, at least 2 prior therapies, and it's randomized to get this drug or a chemotherapy of physician's choice that are the ones allowed on the study, including, I think, Erbilin, and I can't remember, keep citing them, which all ones are permitted. This is another new drug that goes by the name of SC005. Stemcentrx is the company, hence the SC tag. Remember I talked to you about the stem cell hypothesis? This is the company that believes that they can target stem cells. So they have a similar immunoconjugate that they believe is directed against the stem cell and hooked, again, to a different type of chemotherapy poison. So their drug, the SC005 drug, targets that. I think that I will skip, since I'm going back out of time, a little bit and skip talking about mutations to talking a little bit about new trials. So I think to the extent that people knew about trials at all, people think about trials in the standard way that they were when I grew up. Everybody found their place? I can answer questions on interim slide later, which was phase 1, 2, 3 trials. What was a standard phase 1 trial? Phase 1 trial was the first trial that was in people, and it tested the right dose. So once you've got your sea squid poison that works great in mice and makes all the mice tumors disappear, and you found a dose that seems safe in mice, and you figured out a formula to translate that dose into what you think is a good dose for people, and then you back it down a little to be safe, then you would go into a phase 1 trial, and traditionally that allowed multiple tumor types, and you treat 3 people, and then you wait for 6 weeks to make sure that nothing too bad happens, and you go up in the dose a little bit. And that was the idea, and then you found the safe dose, and when you started to get side effects like low white cells or nausea, then you say, okay, let's try to get the right dose. And then that would be the end of your phase 1 trial. We have a safe dose. Then you would go on to what we call the phase 2 trial. In the phase 2 trial, you'd say, okay, well, based on the biology of the tumor, this ought to work in pancreatic cancer, so we're going to test it in 40 patients with pancreatic cancer and see how many patients shrink. And that was the basics of a phase 2 trial. You already knew the right dose from your phase 1 trial. You test it in a certain tumor type, trying to say, okay, does it work? And it would vary whether or not this would be people that had a lot of previous treatment or not. Then you say, okay, it looked great, my waterfall plot's beautiful in phase 2. I'm going to the FDA, you being the small company, and we're going to do a phase 3 trial. In order to get FDA approval, you usually had to have a randomized trial, so it had to be large. These are bigger trials, hundreds to thousands of people, and you have to prove that it's better or safer or improves quality of life compared to a standard therapy. And that's how you would get FDA approval. So that would be what the company's algorithm was. Nowadays, it just isn't like that way. Oh, this is just what the standard. Now, oftentimes, phase 1 trials are limited to 1 tumor type. Sometimes randomization happens earlier. They're what they call seamless trials that move from phase 1 to phase 3 without any interruptions. They have huge expansion cohorts. Whole drugs in the immunotherapy got approved without ever having a phase 3 trial. They went to a phase 1 expansion phase FDA approval step. It just isn't the same at all. The different genomic tumor markers we have also made it complicated. So we have what we call umbrella studies, which don't belong to any phase. So might be all one histology, all breast cancer, but lots of different biomarkers in that breast cancer. So what the idea is, you get a tumor, you test it for a biomarker, and then the treatment will be based on the biomarker, randomized or not. That would be an umbrella trial. Opposite is a bucket trial, where you have a biomarker. You think your drug works great for BRCA mutation, so you're going to open it up to any tumor type that has a BRCA mutation in it, no matter whether it's breast or pancreatic or cholangiocarcinoma or something else. Again, these trials may be large, but they don't fit our traditional paradigm. And then adaptive design trials, where again, they want to be flexible with new information, so it's written into the trial that it changes as you go along. The most classic in breast cancer is the so-called I-SPY trial, which is for treatment before surgery for particularly women with large breast masses. And in I-SPY, they keep introducing new agents to the standard therapy. And if the new agent looks like it's working, then more people get randomized to it, and the statistics get changed sort of on real time as it goes along. So the trial kind of morphs according to the results of the trial. So again, it's made it when people come in and ask me, what phase trial is this? It's not always easy to answer anymore because trial designs have changed so much since I started doing clinical trials. This is the keynote trial, as I explained to you. This was for one of the approvals for Keytruda that started out in the top left with 30 patients and went down through various cohorts and just kept expanding and mutating, and they got the drug approved with never a major phase 3 study. And then finally, just say, how can I find out about clinical trials in my area? Well, you can always ask your oncologist. You can do searches on clinicaltrials.gov that range from simple to complicated, and that will often give you the basics of the eligibility trial. You can call if you have triple-negative breast cancer. The Triple-Negative Breast Cancer Foundation answers questions. And then at most cancer centers will have somebody that will answer questions about their available trial, as well as websites for both patients and physicians explaining what trials might be available.
I just wanted to mention there's also the Metastatic Breast Cancer trial search engine that's on a lot of different sites, like the Living Beyond Breast Cancer site, among others. But I did have a question about clinical trials, and that would be, how do you know when to look for a clinical trial? Like, if you're on standard of care, you definitely have asked, but it seems like if you're on standard of care and it seems to be working for you, you were talking about how trials design has morphed, but as a patient, I have to be really honest in terms of like a phase 1 trial. If that was offered to me, that would, like you said, that's mostly for safety. So I have to be honest. Oftentimes for a phase 1 trial, it's somebody that has exhausted everything else, but not.
Not always anymore. I think, put it this way. I think a lot of it, honestly, is location. First of all, if you have a disease, cancer of any sort and you're doing fine on your current therapy, I usually don't think there's a reason to switch unless something dramatic came out that everybody would know about, right? Say you're doing perfectly well. It's similar with even starting a new approved drug. There is no reason to switch unless, bingo, they suddenly approve the drug that cures it. And if that happens, everybody will know about it. So it's not like you would have to go searching. It would be in the news. Your doctor would know. So in general, I think the time to consider a switch is when the cancer grows. Phase 1 trial could be considered at any point, right? Like you could have a phase 1 trial with frontline therapy. It's more common, say, in ovarian cancer, where only about 5 to 15% of patients will get cured. So adding a new agent in, usually in that case it would be added to standard therapy, might be worth the risk. You could say, okay, we don't yet know the dose of this. It looks really promising. We, however, think it's going to work best if it's added in early rather than late, just because cancers get more resistant. And no matter what the drug is, immunotherapy, anything, if the cancer has had the chance to be exposed and learn to mutate around lots of different treatments, the chances that working to a subsequent treatment is lower. That's how cancers work on average. Everybody is different. Everybody's cancer is different. So I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with the phase 1 trial. And again, with the trial design, it's different. But I'm not sure I would go looking at that point unless you happen to be in a place where your doctor discussed it with you, right? A lot of times being treated close to home is going to be more important, the most important thing.
I just have a question about ER positive. I mean, as you get older, let's say you have hardly any estrogen in your body anyway. I mean, isn't that going to help you avoid a recurrence just because you're losing estrogen, or is it going to become resistant to your therapy regardless?
It eventually becomes resistant regardless. It is an odd thing that with older women who already have low estrogen still get plenty of ER positive breast cancer, and all aromatase inhibitors do is make that low level of estrogen lower, right? Aromatase is the enzyme in your body that turns male hormones, which even postmenopausal women have. They're made in the adrenal glands into female hormones, into estrogens. Aromatase inhibitors block that, so your low level of estrogen goes a little bit lower, and that seems to work just fine. Just as well as it does if you're premenopausal and your estrogen level is up here, then you might shut your ovaries down to bring it down to here. But it seems that you still have some.
Well, I wonder to look at that in a slightly different way. I mean, if you look at a woman's risk for breast cancer goes up as she gets older, and I think would that be because the longer you stick around, like the more cell divisions essentially you would be subject to. So I think that I think it's the estrogen question is interesting, but I think cancer itself is a disease of aging. I mean, the median age for breast cancer is 61. So
Most pediatric cancers are sort of a different world, and some cancers have what we call bimodal, like people with acidic leukemia peaks in childhood and then peaks again when you're older, but most adult cancers can become more frequent as you get older regardless. That is correct, but the fact is that you don't get more estrogen receptor negative breast cancer as you get older. In fact, that you get more estrogen receptor positive breast cancer as you get older. The percentage increases. But yes, cancer tends to be a disease of aging, whether because your immune system ages or your cells are just more likely to make a mistake, or I don't know.
I have a quick question. On the I-SPY trial, if you've been screened for the I-SPY trial, can you actually get from I-SPY their mammogram versus just their indicator from the mammogram? Can you legally get a copy of the actual mammogram out on I-SPY?
Nobody wants to why not. Do they not give it to you?
They won't. They say it's theirs.
I have to check with the I-SPY coordinator. I didn't know that. But you can always have the mammogram done again and billed, because if it was done on I-SPY, it would have been done for free because it was a trial, right?
Right.
So they wouldn't have billed you. So if you can't get it as part of the study, and actually your consent form should have said, right? Usually the consent form says what information will be given to you and what won't. Then it could be done as part of standard of care, should be covered because it's approved, and then certainly did. I will check.
Do you know if the mammogram on that one indicator, the GR?
The GR is not part of the mammogram, no.
Okay.
No. Oh, you mean what actual genes are in it? Do you mean the score or the report?
No.
Or what genes were?
Both.
I think the gene part is proprietary. I don't even know that anybody has that, right?
So what test would show that GR then?
You would have to have a stain for GR.
Just specifically for GR?
Yeah, it would have to be, it has a chemical stain for it, which I don't know that there's any FDA-approved stains for it yet. I think one of the issues with this, like with PD-L1, is working out an assay that's reliable and reproducible. Because there's no drugs approved yet on the basis of your GR, so when the drug gets approved, presumably the FDA will require approval of an assay to match it that they have tested and they believe will give you reliable and reproducible results. You call some companion assays.
Do you have any experience or opinion on adding CBD and or THC to protocol? Let's say if there's Ibrance and letrozole.
Do not.
The question is, if you start out with an AI, but then you tried the Faslodex, you had a reaction to Faslodex, is there another in-line drug with Faslodex?
Tamoxifen, and if you didn't have tamoxifen to begin with, you can still use tamoxifen. There is no other drug in that category of Faslodex which increases the destruction of the estrogen receptor. There's some pill ones that are in study but not approved yet, but you can try tamoxifen or megestrol acetate, which work in breast cancer. There's trials of actually estrogens, in the old days, high-dose estrogens worked as well as other treatments, and there's some studies of those. Androgens occasionally work. Just if you have a tumor that seems to be very hormone sensitive, you can try down the line hormone.
I guess the question was, what was after Faslodex down the line?
If you're going to try more endocrine therapy, if Faslodex wasn't tolerated, I would probably go to tamoxifen.
It was a combination of an AI. It was
Arimidex with Bacillus, all studied.
I wouldn't worry too much about having this Bacillus mutation. I don't think that there was one study that showed an improvement with the combination of the two. I don't think most studies showed it, so I guess I wouldn't worry too much. It won't be interesting. If you progressed on the AI and then tried Bacillus and didn't tolerate it, and then, then I wouldn't do AI plus tamoxifen. I wouldn't do that.
Do you have time for one more question?
So, since you didn't have a chance to talk about genomic testing, I was just interested, at ASCO there was a lot of talk about precision medicine, and, we talked about Foundation One and garden testing, and I think if you were newly diagnosed, maybe, since I wasn't, and I had lived with the disease for a while, I guess I was trying to figure out, when should such testing, when should genomic testing be considered?
So I think in breast cancer, you should mostly consider it when you're looking for a study, because there are very few approved therapies that depend on the results of your genomic testing. There's a lot of trials out there that might match you with specific genomic abnormalities. So I would usually say do it at the time when you're ready to use it, because the genomic testing gets updated constantly. So why spend $4,000 or whatever dollars on a genomic test and that you're not going to use until 3 years down the line when the 60 genes you want weren't included? There are two situations where I think are an exception, and these are not common, so I don't, but there is in a subtype of breast cancer called lobular breast cancer, which some of you may have heard of. They're usually estrogen receptor positive. They tend to be diffuse spiderwebby spreading, more often missed on mammogram, not always. But anyway, it's a smallish percentage. A small percentage of lobular breast cancers, especially an aggressive subset called pleomorphic lobular, so we're talking a subset of a subset, have HER2 mutations in them. And these are not HER2 amplified, so they won't show up as positive on a regular HER2 trial they study. If you did FISH, they might or might not show up. There's a lot of ways to test for HER2, but the best point is they might not show up on a standard way of testing for HER2 that might show up on genomic testing. So for patients with lobular metastatic disease, especially if it seems to be refractory, not responding well to hormone therapy, I recommend it almost for everybody to make sure that there aren't HER2 mutations, because we have a lot of drugs out there that are known deficient, for that. Microsatellite instability is a term meaning you've got a lot of mutations in the tumor pretty much. That isn't terribly common in breast cancer. It means it's more common, say, in endometrial cancer, and it's a group of patients where immunotherapy is FDA approved across tumor types and tends to work really well. So you can always try and do it for that purpose, but it's a really long shot for most women with breast cancer. All right. Well, thanks a lot, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.